She walked down the aisle at Westminster Abbey in front of the world, stepping into one of the most powerful families on earth. The cameras flashed, the crowds roared. It looked like the beginning of a permanent fairy tale. But years later, leaked emails would show a very different reality. Behind the privilege, the staff, and the royal estates, Sarah Ferguson was scrambling for cash. At one point, she was urgently asking Jeffrey Epstein, a man already convicted for exploiting a minor, to help cover her rent. In another message, she joked, "You are a legend, just marry me." How does someone who once had access to unimaginable wealth end up begging a disgraced financier for money? This isn't just a story about luxury. It's about excess, denial, and a pattern of decisions that kept spiraling long after the fairy tale faded. And the deeper you look, the harder it is to understand how it all went so wrong. If you enjoy deep dives into stories like this, make sure you're subscribed. There's a lot more beneath the surface than the headlines ever show. And the warning signs were there from the very beginning. Sarah Ferguson didn't just marry into wealth, she married into a machine built on tradition, image, and discipline. In July 1986, her wedding at Westminster Abbey wasn't just a ceremony, it was a global event, the kind of moment that instantly transforms a person into a symbol. And for a while, she played the part. She had the palaces, the security, the status, and a level of access most people can't even picture. But almost immediately, stories started following her that didn't fit the polished royal image. Not because she was rude or cruel, but because she seemed drawn to excess in a way that felt compulsive. According to later reporting and biographies, the spending wasn't occasional splurging, it was constant, and it wasn't even normal rich person luxury. It was the kind of high-maintenance behavior that required an entire team of people just to keep her day-to-day life running exactly the way she wanted. And once you understand what her lifestyle actually looked like behind closed doors, the next part of the story becomes almost inevitable. Because the money didn't just disappear, it burned. At one point, Sarah Ferguson reportedly had 17 staff members working for her: a cook, a driver, a maid, a butler, a dresser, a nanny, 3 secretaries, a personal assistant, an accountant and an assistant, gardeners, even a flower arranger and a dog walker. This wasn't palace protocol, this was personal preference. Her underwear was allegedly ironed daily. If the laundry didn't carry the exact scent she preferred, it was sent back to be washed again. 2 hot water bottles were placed in her bed every night, filled to precise temperatures. Orange juice had to be freshly squeezed at the exact moment she sat down to breakfast, too early, and it was rejected. Travel wasn't simple either. Reports claim she traveled with up to 25 suitcases at a time. 1 contained only clothes hangers. 5 were packed with toiletries and makeup alone. Excess baggage fees reportedly ran into the thousands per trip. And then there was the spending that made even wealthy insiders raise an eyebrow. £65,000 paid to a personal trainer she used twice, a £51,000 Selfridges personal shopping bill, £14,000 spent in a single month at a wine merchant, lavish dinners featuring entire sides of beef and lamb, much of it thrown away. Even smaller bills stacked up: a £500 newsagent tab, petrol card charges left unpaid, butchers and dry cleaners chasing balances. It wasn't one catastrophic purchase, it was constant leakage, money flowing out faster than it ever flowed in. And eventually, the illusion cracked. By the early 1990s, the numbers were no longer whispers, they were headlines. Her debts reportedly climbed past £3.7 million. Banks began demanding immediate repayment. Coutts, one of the most elite financial institutions in Britain, allegedly gave her just days to produce hundreds of thousands of pounds. Creditors weren't just luxury brands anymore, they were everyday businesses. Butchers, cleaning companies, car hire firms. At one point, even her petrol card was pulled. Help came, but it wasn't sustainable. A bailout reportedly stepped in to stop the immediate collapse. The crisis was contained temporarily, but the spending habits didn't change. The pressure eased, and the cycle continued. Then came another blow. In 2009, her lifestyle brand collapsed, adding hundreds of thousands in fresh debt. Estimates of what she owed ranged into the millions again. Bankruptcy was no longer hypothetical, it was looming. And this time there wasn't an obvious safety net waiting in the wings. So she reached out to someone else, and that decision would define everything that followed. The financial connection didn't begin with desperation, it began quietly. In 2001, Jeffrey Epstein wired Sarah Ferguson $150,000. Her representatives later claimed it was linked to business dealings and that the money was repaid within 48 hours. On paper, it looked transactional, contained, explainable. But the relationship didn't end there. Years later, after her company collapsed and debts resurfaced, the tone changed. In October 2010, she sent an urgent email asking for £20,000 to cover rent that same day. The message warned that her landlord might go to the press if the payment wasn't made immediately. A few months earlier, she had asked whether she could borrow $50,000, possibly even $100,000, to handle what she described as small bills. When the funds reportedly arrived, her reply was casual, familiar. "You're a legend, just marry me." Publicly, she would later call accepting money from him a gigantic error of judgment and insist she regretted the association. But private messages told a more complicated story. In another email sent after distancing herself publicly, she thanked him for being steadfast and generous, apologizing for criticism and explaining she had been overwhelmed. For years, those messages stayed buried. Then they surfaced, and the reaction was immediate. Once those emails became public, the damage wasn't slow, it was instant. Organizations that had supported Sarah Ferguson for decades began cutting ties. Charities distanced themselves. Long-standing relationships ended almost overnight. And suddenly, the story wasn't just about embarrassing spending habits anymore. It was about judgment so reckless it was impossible to defend. Because the most unforgivable detail wasn't the money, it was the timing. This wasn't an association from before people knew. Epstein had already been convicted. The warnings were already public. And yet, the messages showed comfort, closeness, and even flirtation, all wrapped around requests for cash. At the same time, the financial picture remained bleak. Reports suggested she was forced to sell property at a loss. Her net worth was described as shockingly low compared to the life she once lived. Even her foundation announced it would pause operations. And perhaps the most brutal detail of all came from insiders who claimed Epstein didn't even particularly like her, that he saw her less as a friend and more as a way in, a connection to status, a tool. A woman once welcomed into the most exclusive circle on earth, reduced to begging someone like that for rent money. And in the end, it wasn't just the spending that ruined her, it was the choices she made when the money finally ran out. Sarah Ferguson's story is one of the strangest contradictions in modern public life. A woman who once stood at the center of royal history, later exposed in leaked emails asking a convicted predator for rent money. And the craziest part is, it wasn't one mistake. It was years of excess, years of denial, and years of thinking someone else would always be there to clean up the mess, until suddenly, nobody was. Because when you build your entire life around luxury, image, and expensive comfort, the fall isn't just financial, it's public, it's humiliating, and it becomes permanent. So now I want to ask you something. Do you think Sarah Ferguson was simply reckless with money, or was she addicted to the lifestyle even when it started destroying her? Drop your thoughts in the comments, I'll be reading them. And if you want more deep dives into the stories people really don't want unpacked, make sure you're subscribed, because the next one is even wilder.